Welcome to High Stakes, episode 16. I'm your host, Neil Orfield. You can find me on Twitter at PlayerQDFS. The producer today, as always, is Mike Lawrence. You can find him on Twitter at Awesemo. And my guest today is Steve Buzzard on Twitter at Steve Buzzard. You probably know him better, though, as Dacoltz on FanDuel and DraftKings. One of the best DFS players in the world across sports, across football, basketball, baseball, MMA, the list goes on. Steve wins at everything, including in 2018. Steve had a particularly epic year where he had several weeks that he just killed the football season, but perhaps most impressively, he won a Millie Maker and then went on to win the 2018 FanDuel World Fantasy Football Championship. Steve, we have talked a little bit here and there through DMs, not a ton, but you're still probably in my, like, if we did one of those bubbles of people you talk to the most about DFS, you'd probably be in my bubble there. But this is the first time we've ever talked in person, so I'm happy to meet you today. How are you feeling today?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Really have enjoyed a lot of the shows that you have done here so far. So glad to get a chance to hang out a little bit, talk some DFS, talk about what the DFS lifestyle looks like, what we're working on, and yeah, great stuff. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, should be a good conversation. Thanks for coming on. I like your Rockies hat. I saw the hat and I thought about switching to my Rockies hat. People always comment, they think I'm from Colorado. I actually have only been to Colorado once. It was on my honeymoon. I went to a Rockies game. It was sunny. My wife and I each both bought hats because it was sunny out. You actually live in Colorado, though. You moved out there when you went pro in DFS, if I remember correctly. Where are you from originally, and why did you decide on Colorado?
Yeah, so it was probably sunny that day because it's sunny every day in Colorado.
Yeah.
That's one of the main reasons that we moved out here, was the ability to just have a nice atmosphere and ability to just go hiking kind of whenever we want and just enjoy the outdoor. We love that type of stuff. The kids, family, everybody. So we really get a lot of enjoyment out of that. Originally grew up in Indiana, spent a lot of time in Indianapolis, and then moved out to New York for a while before coming out here. So all of those are much more gloomy places to be. So that's really where we got our chance to move out here.
I probably should have been able to guess that based on your username, Dacoltz. I know that you're a Colts fan, and you're also a fan of like the Bulls and the Cubs, if I'm remembering correctly. How did that happen? Are they the closest relative? No, the Pacers are right there in Indiana. How did that happen?
Yeah, so I mean, growing up, the Cubs were basically on TV or the radio every day, so
WGN,
gotta definitely check them out every day. I remember coming home from school, turning on the radio, listening to the game or watching the game that day, or depending on whichever one was on. And then many times just going up to Wrigley to watch in some games. So that was that. And then with the Bulls, Michael Jordan was playing during the time growing up, so definitely had to enjoy that time frame. So I think those are the main things. I don't follow any specific teams nearly as closely now as what I used to, so I don't know that those are like
including the Colts.
Yeah, including the Colts. My teams are whoever I want to win that week, I guess, is probably my team this specific week.
Yeah, I mean, that's largely true for me too. I am now, I'm a Timberwolves fan. I'm definitely a bigger Timberwolves fan than any other Minnesota sport, but I want the Vikings to win. I want the Twins to win, but if it's going to cost me, $30,000, I'll take my money instead.
Yep.
I asked you the question like I don't know why you would be a Bulls and Cubs fan. I was a Bulls and Cubs fan because they were on WGN, and the Bulls in particular were a power horse. I was actually a Scottie Pippen guy. I guess that was my way of getting different, getting unique despite following the same team as everybody else. Anyway, let's move on and talk a little bit more about your background, more specific to DFS. I like to start with the question, what kind of background do you have in statistics, and do you have formal or informal training?
Yeah, so not really any specific formal training in statistics other than, some college classes that I took. But in general, my family has just kind of always been pretty good at math and more just like intuitively understanding math, I guess, more so than like understanding specific statistics in general. And like finite math is probably something I kind of excelled at a little bit more so than even statistics. Most of my statistics training is kind of like if I am unsure of how to do something, I might Google it. But in general, it's more, I think this is how it should work. I don't know if there's really a formal statistics methodology around it, but I'm going to make it work this way because it's what it kind of feels like to me of how I should solve this type of a problem. So what we actually do like doing as a family quite a bit is we just ask. I just often ask at dinner, like the kids, some of those fun games where like, I don't know if you've ever heard of the kind of the random interview questions of like, how many piano repair shops are there in Chicago? And essentially they have to think through and come up with a solution on why and how much the answer is. And then they just kind of walk through and you just kind of help work on your intuitive skill set that way, and problem solving and critical thinking. And so I normally like to come up with a couple of those questions a couple times a week and just have them think through it, and me do the same and see what kind of answers we come up with.
You mentioned on you did an interview with Brian Jester, the emotional bankroll. You were one of his first guests, and you mentioned that your wife helps out with some of the programs that you run just to kind of check how you're doing in DFS, and that also your son has now gotten into it. It sounds like you have a pretty smart family in general. That doesn't really shock me, but you got the whole family working for you.
Yep, yeah, they've all helped me out at different times. My wife did that a lot while our littlest one was at home, and she was staying home with him at that time. And now she's kind of moved on from helping out on that as much, and my son has been helping out a bit more. And yeah, it's been super helpful to have those type of things and people to just kind of help you with those type of processes.
That's impressive that you can find that kind of help within your own home, and yeah, not at all shocking that you have a brilliant family. But on that topic, what kind of training, formal or informal, do you have in computer programming?
Yeah, so computer programming, I'm pretty much awful at. So you're not going to see me working in Python or anything like that. Yeah, basically, I'm going to do none of that. If you consider Excel computer programming, which I mean, it kind of is the same, then I guess I'm pretty good. I would say I'm probably in maybe like the top 0.01% of Excel users,
Okay,
I would say.
that's pretty good.
So like, I think that's an area that I really excel at. But the same thing, like in regards to, was that formal training? Not so much. It's more of, I have a problem that I want to solve, and I will Google to figure out how to solve that problem. So I think you definitely shouldn't be intimidated of learning Excel or something. Although I guess I should say the opposite. Maybe I shouldn't be intimidated for learning Python, or something
Right.
like that. But I have been, and I just haven't had the time to be able to do so. But yeah, I think Excel, you can do the majority of the stuff you want to be able to do there, and it has a really good user interface. So that's kind of the way that I've gone about doing those type of things.
Okay, so with that background, or kind of lack of background in mind, tell me about approximately when did you start getting involved with DFS, and what drew you into DFS?
Yeah, so I started in 2013 or 2014, kind of in that time frame. So I've been around pretty much as long as most anybody, I would say, at this point, right? A lot of people started in that time have quit, I feel like. But there are still quite a few that still are. What really got me interested in it is just like the strategy of games in general. So I've always really loved playing season-long fantasy games. I always loved playing strategy games, so it was kind of like a combination of the two that brought me together. So I was in a lot of season-long fantasy games, like fantasy football especially, and fantasy baseball, basketball a little bit, but maybe not quite as much as the other two. And those were a lot of fun. But it was a long grind to play each of them. But there was a lot of fun with that. And then there was a lot of like online games started coming out, but even before DraftKings and FanDuel, that were pretty interesting as well. Like I know even NBC started playing. they started doing like these Sunday night contests well before there was Sunday night showdowns. They were, you could just basically pick any players that you wanted, and I won one of those. So trying to take on my DFS skills now, I solo shipped one of those, which is very hard when you just had to pick whoever you wanted to.
Yep.
So not even salary as an issue. So that was a pretty cool thing. Nowhere near the prizes that they have now, but yeah, it was just like things like that was kind of what got me interested in it.
It sounds like we have very similar backgrounds. I also started in 2013. I've told the story several times. I didn't really care about basketball, so I was going to watch basketball with my brother. I was like, I guess I'll do this FanDuel thing, make some lineups here, and that got me hooked in DFS. I played on my first win in a large field type of contest was on a website called snap.com, which was defunct, I think, within a couple of years after I played on it. But it was supposedly there were like 30,000 people in it. I have no idea how many of those were actually real people. But all I remember about it is that I won basketball, and then the next week I won baseball. And I remember that the baseball one, I had John Rocker was my relief pitcher, and he had turned out to be a racist shithead, but he was at the time he was just one of the guys, like he was going to pitch. The Braves had a lot of games that week. That's one of the few things I remember was that he did really well for me. So that kind of, I guess and I also come from a fantasy sports background where I played season long for forever, fantasy football, fantasy baseball. So very similar backgrounds in that sense. But let's go back a little bit more. So even before DFS, you had a pretty interesting career before DFS, right? Were you on Wall Street? What were you doing before DFS?
So no, not on Wall Street specifically. I worked for a consulting company for quite a few years, and then I went to work for a Fortune 100 company where I was running one of their large units in the finance side. So a lot of my background was on the finance side, and I think that was what really helped. In addition to the strategy games and the season long games, that fantasy that finance background kind of helped out quite a bit, as well as I know you've had a lot of people on here that played poker as well. I did play poker, maybe not like professionally as much as some of the other folks, but that was primarily because I was playing, or because I was working quite a bit at the same time. But I was probably semi-professional, good at and pretty good at that. But those were kind of my main things I was doing back then.
Were you playing online, or were you actually like going to casinos to play poker?
Most often online. Occasionally I would do some, in-person poker, but the majority of the time I was playing online tournaments. A lot of sit and goes. Those seemed like they were super soft at the time back in the day. You could manage a lot more sit and goes at the same time, because you could play quite a few hands. You weren't having to play as many hands at each table. So like tournaments, you could just sit there a long time also. So definitely wasn't as big into cash games, but I wanted to be able, when I could play, which was quite limited, I wanted to make sure I was be able to play as much as possible. So yeah, I like those type of games.
Okay, right on. All right, back to DFS. Were you a winning DFS player right away? And did you immediately play high volume, or did you ramp up over time after you'd seen some success?
Yeah, so I was looking back, because I always kind of remember try to remember what the time frames were, but I was looking back at my tracker to verify. But when I started off, with pretty much a basic deposit of $500, which was matched on FanDuel only. That was the only one I was playing on at the time, and that was matched 100% match. I eventually went on DraftKings and got a match there as well. So DFS sites don't have the matches anymore, but you should definitely be taking advantage of those type of matches or free bets in the sports betting world, because it's the same type of thing right now where you're getting essentially free money. So that was like the biggest one that they had at that time. Even now with sports betting, the bets are like the amount that they're able to match you for, or even bigger than that a lot of times. So I've seen some in the 1,000 or 2,000 even.
Wow.
That you can have in sports betting. So that's pretty awesome. But yeah, I started off with that $1,000 on FanDuel, played fantasy football, DFS football, that first year in 2013. Had a pretty good season. I think I turned that $1,000 into around 50,000, which was pretty good. I mean, it wasn't something that was like a life-changing type year. I didn't win any massive tournaments, but it was just like a consistently pretty good season. Normally playing just 1 to 5 lineups probably, and playing a fair amount of cash games as well as tournaments. So that went pretty well. I didn't play any of the sports that next year, like baseball or basketball, etc., because I was traveling a lot at that time with work. So my work not only was the travel within the U.S., but I also did a lot of overseas travel, and you couldn't play overseas or anything like that. So didn't really make it a priority to learn how to play all those other sports. But once football season started back up again the next year, I had another pretty good season, and that was the time I was like, okay, we're not traveling quite as much this year. I'm going to really dig into the NBA season. And I would say it was that NBA season that really kickstarted my bankroll and really turned things around, because back then I would say the NBA contests were quite soft. Basically, if you had pretty good projections, you could beat most people, I would say. And I was able to do that pretty well. So one thing I did know from finance was, how much you could make off of like stock returns, and how that could that type of kind of keep compounding your interest is really helpful to your bankroll. But the thing with DFS was you could essentially get multi-years worth of stock market compounding and do that within like days. So it really helped build your bankroll up super quickly. And I was basically, by the end of, actually, I guess even within that season, I could essentially play like any of the contests I wanted to play. That's also why I'm no good at bankroll management, because I never really had to try to get good at it. So so I guess that was kind of that background.
Okay, so you say that there weren't that many good projections around. So this is the 2014-15 NBA season is when you really started kind of taking off, making the big bucks. Keeping in mind that you had won 40,000 your first season playing NFL, and to you that is not big bucks, because you have won so much over the years that that's just a small sum to you. But the 14-15 NBA season is the first year that for you considered it to be big winning. So were you creating your own projections at that point, or were you using projections from an outside source?
Yeah, so I was working full time at that time. Basically, I would get home late at right before lock and kind of make a couple lineups and put them in. So I had to make my process as quick as possible, essentially. And there's one key site, I guess I would say, was Basketball Monster at that time. Most people are pretty familiar with Basketball Monster. They had good like maybe okay projections, I think, but what they were really good at was projecting minutes back then. So what I would do is I kind of created my own projection system and dumped in their minutes and let it tell me what I should play. So that was my general process then. And that also gave me a chance to be different from folks with my own process also. Because like a lot of people, I think, were using their projections or else no projections at all. So yeah, I guess you could say it's kind of a mix of my own and theirs. I didn't really have time to do the minute projections at that time, but yeah, I think that was kind of like the best of both worlds in order to be different, because I wasn't using like any ownership or anything like that at the time, just kind of running typically 3 different lineups and making sure that the lineups were a little bit different from each other, more so than anything.
Man, I feel like I missed out by not knowing how to do the kinds of things that you did, because I started playing in 2013, the 2013 NBA season. I was one of the fish that you were taking all of your money from every week. So I'm jealous of you that you got in when it was still pretty easy to make money, because even being a fish, by that point I was still not losing a ton of money. I was still like close to a break-even player, I think, at that point, despite having no idea what I was doing. So I can only imagine the amount of money that you were making and the consistency with which you were making money, which even for a great player like you can't win. You can't win every day anymore. You can't win every week anymore, I assume. I don't think anybody really wins every week anymore. So to be able to just win day after day after day, that must have been pretty big rush. Was that do you miss those days?
Yeah, I mean, that would certainly be pretty cool if it was still the case, but I figured that wasn't going to last forever. But yeah, it was pretty much daily. I remember back in that season, right before the All-Star break that year, or yeah, I think it was right before the All-Star break. Like, I lost a couple of days in a row, and I was just like, what is going on? Is it something
Is it
to do
broken?
with the All-Star break? Are teams not playing as hard because they're mentally getting ready to take a time off? And I'm sure it was probably a lot of, that's just variance at the time. Although I did have found that there are a few things that do happen right before the All-Star break, like assist rates tend to go down because people are just taking kind of lazier shots and stuff like that. But yeah, it was just kind of interesting to it's very different versus now. And I think though that is one thing that people should be aware of now. I get that question a lot, especially in baseball, of, oh, the last week I've had a really bad week. What am I doing wrong? And it's just kind of like, most of the time it's just probably variance in your process. It's not really you're doing anything wrong. You just have to be able to sift through that time frame. And that's why, although I'm bad at it, bankroll management is very important to take into consideration, because you want to ensure that when you do have a couple of bad weeks or something that's not going to kind of like negate your whole process, and you're not going to be able to play anymore. So one of the things I said on a different podcast was like, I feel pretty confident that there's probably some player out there that was like one of the best players that could have played DFS ever, but they didn't have good bankroll management. They kind of like blew their money before they had a chance to really capitalize on that skill set that they had. So don't
Yeah.
become that person.
Yeah, you said that on Jester's podcast, and I think there's no doubt about it that there have been some really great players who probably a lot more skilled than I am at DFS, who have just, they didn't have luck in their first month or two and end up giving up. And I've given the example for baseball. Last year I had my best MLB DFS season ever, and in the month of August I had one winning day the entire month, and it wasn't even like a hugely winning day. I think I maybe won like $10,000, but relative to how much I'm spending every day, that was a majorly losing month. And that's like something you just kind of got to get used to that sometimes in DFS. Like, it happens sometimes. You're just going to have losing streaks where you never get things just right, and especially if you're 150 maxing, obviously it's you need to be top 5 to have a winning day. Generally it's like you just don't win unless you are near the top. So yeah, it's definitely part of the game. All right, so I want to get up to where you join Awesemo, but let's just talk about how you get there. So you started playing DFS and you were still working full-time in finance. How long did you continue with your finance job after you started crushing at DFS? And then how long were you, was there a gap where you just playing DFS before you joined the Awesemo team?
Yeah, so good question. I was doing full-time finance until 2019, I think, essentially.
Oh.
So it was quite a while. It was basically after the NFL season that you mentioned earlier that I was just kind of like, all right, so there's really, at this point, there's not really a whole lot of point to continue to do some of like the full-time finance stuff, and it gives me a chance to move out to Colorado, spend a little bit more time with the family, and do those type of things, and then just do things that are fun to do instead of essentially doing 2 full-time jobs for so about 3 or 4 years there. That was basically 2 full-time jobs, and very high stress jobs, both of them as well. So it was a really tough 3 or 4 years there, and that kind of helped me to try to get out of that rut a little bit. And then I did DFS alone just for maybe like a year there, I guess. Although that was like the time that COVID hit as well. So
Yep.
some of that time was with no sports to play. But I mean, that was kind of an interesting time, like just to be able to, luckily, that was a good spot to be in Colorado so that you could do things away from folks and kind of
Yep.
get out and do hiking and stuff like that. So that was kind of nice to have that ability to still continue to do that. But yeah, after during that time frame, I mean, I had met Alex quite a few times at a lot of the live finals. He's at most every live final. I'm at most every live final. As you go to a lot of the live finals, you kind of get meeting the same people kind of over and over again, and everyone is fun. I don't know that I've had a bad experience with more than maybe a couple people in total at any of those events. If even that, maybe I don't even know if I can think of anybody
No
offhand.
boxing matches to set up here.
Yeah, I don't think so. Not yet. But yeah, just hanging out with Alex at all of the events was always a lot of fun, and it was just someone that I seemed to have a lot in common with, talking to at the event. So just since we were always there, we kind of made it a habit of hanging out together. And when he kind of brought up the idea of coming to work for the site, I thought, yeah, I thought that would be pretty fun to be able to do. I was going to be able to do some finance stuff, work on some tools, and all that type of stuff, which, I mean, can't hardly beat that. So yeah, I thought that was kind of how that played out.
Yeah, you've got a pretty diverse skill set, and definitely something that seems useful for a startup like Awesemo. I mean, I don't know if you'd call it not a startup anymore, but maybe at that time still kind of more of a startup. So definitely seems like you're probably a good fit for Awesemo right away. But you do some content for Awesemo. I've watched several of your videos, but you also do a lot of work behind the scenes. So what kind of stuff do you do for the company?
Yeah, so you're right. I do some content occasionally. I was doing a daily video, which I guess it was a rotation of Sean, Alex, and I doing those videos every day, which I've had several people come up to me and just say, hey, I watched all those videos that you guys were, and Terry was doing them as well. I've watched all those videos, and that's what's really kind of propelled me to doing well. So that's a cool thing, and those are still on the site in our NBA and MLB Pro play videos. So if anyone ever wants to go back and check those out, definitely encourage that. But in general, I'm not doing as much of the day-to-day shows. It's just more of like on the random day that whether I need to do them or if it's an NFL show or something like that. But in general, I'll let Adam and Eric and guys like that are much better at doing that than me. So I'll try to stick to the things that I'm a little bit better at doing. So I spend probably like 50% of my time, I would say, doing finance related stuff, and about 50% of the time doing data and tools type things, which, if the data and tools team is primarily Sean's on, Alex and I just working on tools, getting our projections in better shape so that we can offer you the best points projections as well as ownership projections, and getting new tools out there as well. So I would say, maybe of that 50% of stuff I spend on there, maybe 50% of it is like day-to-day projections and 50% is project related type things. So that's like a whole wide thing of things. Like it could be completely new products, like you're seeing us come out with the new XROIs which is expected ROI on the sports betting scene. This is like how much we kind of expect you to win in general on prop bets, etc. So spending a lot of time on those type of products, or we also spend a lot of time on still making like our DFS projections as well as our prop projections and stuff like that as accurate as possible. So for instance, we break everything down in 2-week sprints, and like this current sprint, I'm working on a couple of different factors that we think are material to the MLB ownership projections. And based on my preliminary findings, it does seem like they are pretty material. So we're going to make another improvement to the ownership projections, and then here in in a couple of maybe a week or so, once we get those updated, you'll see even better ownership projections for MLB for us. I think our ownership projections are, every time I've ever tested them, and we do a fair amount of testing on them, they're as good as, and they're better than anyone in the industry across all the sports really. And I think a lot of that is us continuing to look at what's going on, why things aren't 100%. Why do we see this player was way off in the model, and we go out and fix that. And the same thing for points projections as well. If we consistently see things that aren't working. So for instance, we introduced blocks to our prop bets this year, and those were super successful this season. So we want to continue to roll out those type of new products as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So I wanted to ask you about that. So it sounds like I was going to ask you, have you reached a point with the Awesemo projections that you don't have to do a lot of maintenance? And I guess I can ask that same question about ownership projections. So you do both the actual projections, player projections, and ownership projections. Is it a lot of work in general? Are you always working on these things? Or do you feel like at this point, I mean, you said it yourself that you think you have the best projections, the best ownership projections in the industry. At some point, do you just say, good enough, like, or is it always a work in progress?
So I think it kind of depends on how you think of maintenance. So there's always going to be like ongoing maintenance of, we don't have this player in our player pool because he just got called up from single A because he's a top prospect, and maybe our database only starts with triple A players, or something like that, right? So there's always guys like that are going to be on there. Or there's a naming issue where Josh Smith got just called up, and now he has like conflicts with another Josh Smith in the database. So those type of maintenance things are super annoying, and they're kind of just like a pain, and they're not really like value added to the customer. But we don't have a ton of those, so I'd say that's mostly taken care of. But then like maintenance and continuing to improve the model, I think that's something that we're pretty much always doing. I think we could easily rest and say, hey, we are having the best projections and the best ownership projections in the industry. But like my example here with MLB, I mean, those are things that we have been talking about internally, and we thought, I think we could just make the ownership projections this much better by including these two factors. And we just set out and say, all right, how do we incorporate those most accurately? And because it's only going to make our process better as well as our process for all of our users.
Okay, I got a listener question that is a two-part question, and one of the questions seems relevant here, so I'm going to throw it in here. The sport guy asked, will the team have a mobile app anytime soon? And he also asked how you, Alex, and Sean John and the team work behind the scenes to come up with the most accurate ownership projections. I mean, you've just kind of talked about it a little bit. It sounds like you're doing a lot of back testing of ideas that you have. Is that so maybe expound on that? Like, is it something where you just have like something comes to you in the middle of the night, like I want to test my theory that this is a factor that could affect ownership projections, or what kind of, to the extent you're willing to share, what kind of work are you doing behind the scenes, and give me an estimate of like hours spent. So I know you we could talk about the 80 hours per week that some pros have to do to win at DFS, and you do that work for a lot of us, behind the scenes for us. But how much time are you spending on your models, on the ownership projections, the regular projections, and just more generally, what kind of work are you doing there?
Yeah, good question. So I think the 80 hours is really is a pretty fair statement. If you wanted to go out and build out all of your projection models yourself, play different sports, and build your lineups and late swap and do all those type of things. I think it is very much true that you would have to play 80 hours to do those type of things. And I think from from our team with Alex, Sean, and I would probably say just for the projections for the site, not even like building our own lineups and late swapping and stuff. And of course, there's keeping the up the site and the projection updates throughout the night. I would say that's a pretty conservative effort on how much we spend each week to do that. So I mean, I think what I would say is we spend the 80 hours in order to keep it so that everyone else doesn't have to spend the 80 hours, so that you can just copy the work that we're doing and spend the time to build the lineups that are most advantageous to you, and not having to understand the rotation of the heat and who is or isn't going to play that day, or understanding the AAA player that just got called up. You don't have to do those type of things. You can go out there, build your lineup, sweat the game, and have fun with it instead of having to worry about those type of things. So yeah, together we're spending a lot of time, whether it's making those projections, whether it's double checking to see if Al Horford is rebounding more in the series, right? In the playoffs, the playoffs, we get to see 7 games in a row of different teams, hopefully, and how they're playing each other, and we get to pay attention to the rotations. Our teams rotating differently than what they were in the regular season. So I mean, that is certainly part of the work, and then, like I said, all taking into consideration like your example of, hey, I thought of this idea. Mostly I'll just like ping Alex and Sean and say, hey, what do you guys think about this idea? We haven't considered it before. And they'll either say, no, that doesn't make any sense, and this is why, which is super helpful in and of itself, or they'll say, yeah, that is a good idea. Let's work on that in the next month or so, right? So we have a backlog of tasks that we want to work on and continue to improve the models and bring out new products for everyone. The question about mobile is a good one, because I think our mobile experience is okay right now, but we definitely need to make it a lot better. We do have a mobile app for odd shopping. It's the Awesemo Odd Shopper app, so you can find sports betting very easily on mobile, and I think it is a really good mobile experience from that standpoint, because it allows you to just quickly sort through all the stuff that we have on Odd Shopper and be able to see expected ROI for players, expected win rates, and all those type of things. For the DFS side, it's a little bit trickier, but we do want to get to that point at some point, just because it is a struggle right now to be able to build lineups remotely. So I think that I like that question, and it's something that we have on our mind, and hopefully we'll get there sooner than later.
Yeah, I do some, like if I'm out and I have to make lineups, I actually am able to use my phone to crunch lineups sometimes, but it's definitely not as easy as doing it on my computer. And I'm going back and forth from Fantasy Cruncher to, the top stacks tool, the top pitchers tool, that kind of stuff, and doing a lot of, going back and forth. But yeah, I can make it work. But yeah, definitely a mobile app would be very cool. Also, I want to say, I, for one, appreciate all of the work that you guys do behind the scenes so that I don't have to put in 80 hours. Definitely saves me a lot of time that you guys are putting in that effort for me. Let me take a minute away from this conversation with Steve Buzzard to tell you about our sponsor, NOS Advantage. NOS Advantage is bringing you a different way to enjoy DFS with player props contests. It's 100% peer-to-peer to help level the playing field, with over 500 player props offered. All new users get a $25 deposit bonus with promo code Awesemo. That's AWESEMO. NOS Advantage has mass entry capability with big prize pools. Beat your friends, not the house. Use our NOS Advantage projections and optimal lineup tool to help you take down big prizes. Download in the App Store or play on nohouseadvantage.com. I want to throw a true or false at you. So I'm a regular co-host on the Theory of DFS podcast with Jordan Cooper, and he theorizes that he says that he believes that ownership projections, the primary factor for ownership projections, is that site's own projections. So like, the site, if your projections give you a lot of a player, that is going to be the primary factor in determining if that player is going to have high ownership. Do you believe that is true for most sites? And do you believe that is, and if you're, to the extent you're willing to share, is that a primary factor or the primary factor in Awesemo's ownership projections?
So I think projection is an important factor for sure, because a lot of people are building lineups from projections. But if you're only taking your own site's projections into consideration, it feels like you're missing a pretty big audience. So, and I think there's also a lot of other things that sway the public into thinking who to play. So projections, I think, are a factor, but I would say they're far from the key factor.
Okay.
Well,
I also
maybe I
realized,
wouldn't. Maybe they're still the key factor, but not the only factor. How about that?
okay, yep, that makes sense. Yeah, I set that up as a true false, and then I didn't ask you a true false question. But I think, I mean, you got the idea. You got what I was going for.
False.
Okay, that's right. Okay, good. Yeah, no, that was I always imagine ownership projections being like you're scraping websites and like, you know, searching Twitter to figure out who's being talked about them. I mean, not searching, but like, again, scraping, like doing that kind of stuff to figure out, you know, who are people talking about the most. But that makes sense that it generally comes down to projections and who are 150 maxes or people using the projections, who are they going to end up with. It makes sense to me that that does end up being a pretty big factor in the ownership projections. But it's good to hear that you're also looking at other factors all the time.
Yeah, I mean, like projection itself is maybe important for you and I, for instance, but the people that are putting in just a couple lineups, they may not have access to projections. They may not have access to an optimizer. And if you don't have access to an optimizer, projections are really hard to just build a lineup on, right? So things like our ranking or the big board on the sports that we have big boards on, I think are a lot more intuitive to help someone that doesn't have an optimizer to build lineups. So yeah, I think there's a lot of things that go into it.
For sure. And for those kind of people, I mean, the lineup builder tool seems like it would be very useful. I have to admit, I don't think that I have ever actually personally used the lineup builder, only because I use an optimizer, which, you know, does it for me. And I'm not hand building one lineup, but that seems like a pretty useful tool for people who, you know, don't have access to Fantasy Cruncher. You can still make good lineups just using the lineup builder tool.
The one thing I would say on the lineup builder tool that is really good, and it's the only lineup builder tool that I've seen in the industry that grades how unique your lineup is as well as how well it scores on projections. So I think it is like especially in a sport like baseball where your goal isn't necessarily to optimize for the best lineup unless you're playing a cash game, of course.
Yep.
But where you're kind of looking for diversity and difference from the field, the lineup builder really helps in that. And I think it's, even if you don't use it to build a lot of lineups, when you're starting off, I think it is super valuable to be able to get a kind of that intuitive sense on how your lineup is shaping up compared to other lineups in the contest.
Maybe that's something I should start using for high stakes. I've mentioned several times that despite the podcast I host being called High Stakes, I have not had a lot of personal success in high stakes DFS. So maybe that's where I'm going wrong. Maybe I've thought, well, clearly probably what I need to do is actually hand build, because I, you know, was becoming a successful hand builder before I started 150 maxing. Maybe I need to get back to my roots, and maybe I need to actually be using the lineup builder tool to kind of to guide me a little bit more. That might be really useful. All right. When I first started using Awesemo tools and projections, I had the impression, and I think I got this actually from people, I had the impression that Alex was updating everything alone, that everything came down to Alex doing the, you know, if there was a late scratch in the NBA, it was Alex who was going in and making all of the changes. Was that ever true? And how long have you been involved?
So I guess I don't know for sure. That's a good question. I think probably that it was him. He's like a robot, so he can do everything. But yeah, definitely. Hopefully I've been helping him out, so he hasn't been, you know, as amount of time to take him to do all that. He was probably spending the 80 hours or more to keep everything up from that. I don't know. You know, Tom and some of the other guys may have been helping him as well, but yeah, I'm not 100% sure on that. I've been, you know, helping with that process since 2020, I guess, now at this point, as well as Sean. So
I gotta say, it's very comforting. As much as I trust Alex, and I'm sure Alex was doing a phenomenal job, but it's very comforting to know that there are multiple people there, just in case like Alex's computer goes down or something. Just knowing that there are at least 3 people behind the scenes who have the means and the ability to update, projections for a player being a late scratch or something like that. It's comforting to me to know that there are 3 of you guys working on it and are all capable of doing it. Does it ever hinder your DFS play, do you think, updating projections for the site? So for example, when there is late breaking news in the NBA, for me, it's already a crunch. I don't have to update for anybody else, just using the information that you give me. It's still, can be kind of a time crunch if news comes out late enough. Do you feel like it ever hinders your play? Like, I got to update the site and then I don't have enough time to do my own lineups?
So for the most part, I would say no, not really, because essentially, well, a couple of things. So I would say all of us have we have in totality a good process of coming up with like different scenario projections for NBA. So if LeBron isn't going to play today, we have a pretty good idea. Like we spend the time up front to make alternative projections to just kind of understand where we think the news is going to head. And that's not perfect because sometimes you might think, okay, LeBron isn't going to play and Taylor Horton Tucker you think is going to be the starter, but then it ends up being Avery Bradley or whatever, right? So like you have to redo projections occasionally, even in those situations. So that's not 100% foolproof by any means, but that does help us get things out quickly. But I mean, if you think of it that way, for you, you said, okay, you can take the projections that we updated and then run your lineups. So I know exactly when we're updating the projections. Maybe you have to refresh or do whatever, and maybe you're even like a minute or 2 minutes later than when we update them because you aren't on the site right then. I know exactly when we've updated the projections, and I could just take the projections that we updated and start running my lineups from there. And then plus an NBA, even if it's like a last second thing, there's always late swaps. So, maybe it's not 100% perfect for your lineups because you maybe would have rather had Avery Bradley in a couple lineups other than some other guy that locked at 7 o'clock, but it's fairly close. I think the only time I've really had too many issues, and it's kind of funny that you bring up this one, is just this last Friday was actually I think it was Friday. They canceled 2 baseball games like maybe 10 minutes before lock, and then also Tyler Hero scratched as well at that same time. So so I had to update the site for NBA, and we were also updating for the MLB news, and those were games that locked at 7, so it wasn't a late swipe opportunity as well for the MLB. So that was maybe like one of the more difficult ones, I guess. But in general, I don't think it is too big of a hindrance. I've gotten used to the process, I guess, more than anything. So it helps me with the scenarios that we've come up with know what to be on the lookout for and kind of what I'm going to do probably already. So I think that's pretty helpful.
Okay, so the process of updating things does not hinder your play at all. Do you ever question your decision to give up some of your edge though by sharing your knowledge with the public, not just through doing shows in a Discord, but through your work on the projections and tools?
So yeah, I mean, I think if there was no Awesemo out there, like if there was only the other sites that are giving kind of general information and don't have great projections already, then maybe. But the fact that there is already Awesemo out there where everyone can get great projections, I think that edge is kind of already gone in some ways, right? So if you are not a subscriber to Awesemo, you're going to be kind of at a hindrance no matter what. If you are subscribing to Awesemo, you already have a lot of that edge that you would have with or without me. Now, certainly, I hope I'm continuing to make things better, but I mean, there's like so many other benefits that come with it to me that kind of outweigh that lost edge, like getting a chance to hang out with people like, Eddie and Tom and Sean and Alex and you and, whoever else on the team. I can't name all, 50 of the people that are awesome to hang out with. So that's really cool. Just hanging out within the community. I get to do an Ask Me Anything type every Thursday in Discord, plus just hanging out and seeing people winning in Discord. Like some of the nights after I kind of like I saw us taking a huge stand on a certain player and seeing all the screenshots coming in on our Discord, and
Yep.
knowing that that's like something that you had a good part of, even if it was one of those people that beat me, which has happened
Right.
several times. But it's still like it feels like that's that far and kind of far outweighs like kind of the edge thing
Yep.
to me.
So you kind of get the best of both worlds is what I'm hearing. I mean, you're still winning. It's not like you're suddenly losing at DFS. You're still crushing DFS. But then on top of that, you get, it's a fun social thing where you get to talk with all of the Awesemo people. And then it's also a good professional thing to be able to continue using your finance degree. You're the CFO of Awesemo. So it sounds like you kind of got it good on all sides, because it's not, even if you gave up some edge, it's not like your edge is gone. You're still obviously crushing DFS. So it sounds pretty good to me. And yeah, you brought up the AMA that you do in the Discord. You had said on Jester's podcast, my favorite part of my week is doing the Awesemo Discord AMA. We got a question from Wascoopy, who asked, how much time do you spend on the people or management side of the business?
Yeah, that's a good question. So a lot, I guess, is the short answer. I don't know how to quantify that specifically. Even like in finance, you're kind of doing a lot of, you know, calculating EV decisions and stuff like that. So it's not 100% people side, but a fair amount, I would say, definitely for sure. And then like in regards to the AMA and just hanging out with people in the community, that's maybe not quite as much as I would like. So hopefully I can continue to do that a little bit more. But the AMA, that's like an hour every week that I'm just taking like any questions that people have. It's especially during the NBA and NFL season, that's a really busy time and get a lot of good questions and hopefully helping a lot of people out on that. And I know a lot of people say, hey, I even if I'm not there asking questions that day, I go back through and read through all of your answers for the week. So I think it feels like it's helped out a lot of people, and that always feels pretty good to me.
Yeah, definitely seems like a useful thing to have access to Steve answering your questions anytime you want. Yeah, it's definitely helpful for a lot of Awesemo subscribers, and I definitely check it out from time to time myself. Really interesting stuff in there. All right, I get the impression that sports betting is kind of taking over the world. States across the country are suddenly legalizing it. Not legal in Minnesota yet, sadly, so I can't take advantage. But it seems like everyone I talk to from other states, like, yeah, we just got sports betting, or obviously a lot of states have already had it, but it seems to be taking over the world. Are you working on any sports betting related tools for Awesemo? And do you think Awesemo is ready to adjust? If sports betting ultimately cuts into the DFS user base, is Awesemo, do you think, in a spot where it can adjust to that?
Yeah, so we're working on a lot of really good stuff for sports betting, and that's a great reason for you to come out to Colorado.
Yeah.
We have all kinds of legal sports betting out here. So we have Odd Shopper. If folks aren't familiar with that, you can find it on the top of our Awesemo homepage. You can see it up there, and then you could also just go to oddshopper.com, and that is really cool because we have so many different props right now where we're given expected ROIs for them, which is essentially what we think are your top bets that you can make every single day. We have some of that on the website or in our prop tool as well. Allows you to kind of download our expected ROIs as well as what the best bets are at different sports books, which is something you don't really find many places where you can download odds directly. So that's kind of a pretty cool thing. And then we also, by the name Odd Shopper, allows you to do some shopping to see what odds are the best odds at all of the different sports books. So you're always making sure that you're getting the best odds. And that's really like such a huge part of beating the sports book, is finding the times that the sports books disagree with each other. So not only does it allow you to see which of the bets we think are good, but then you could also compare does MGM look better than FanDuel, which looks better than DraftKings or Caesars, etc. So I think that is super helpful. We're definitely continuing to build out a lot more different props. So like we have already a whole bunch in NFL, NBA, we have home run and strikeout props in baseball. We're working on some more of those continuously. And then we also have a whole bunch of other stuff that I think you'll see coming here in the near future that I think is going to be super cool and help you be able to win. We've tested our NFL props last year. They did really well. NBA did really well this last year as well, especially as we got to the latter half of the year as we continue to improve our process that continue to do well. And then every other day, it seems like Sean is crossing some parlays with K's these days using our props. So yeah, I think we have a lot to offer there, and we will continue to have a lot more as well.
Okay, so I know that with sports betting, the timeliness is more important than DFS in general. Like a lot of times the odds are changing, the lines are changing frequently in sports betting. Is Odds Shopper something that is like, the numbers come in early in the day and it doesn't update frequently, or how frequently are the numbers on Odds Shopper updating?
Yeah, so Odds Shopper is real time. You can get the number. I think it might be every 2 to 3 minutes or something like that. Some books might be a little bit slower than others, but in general, they should be pretty much current within the last 5 minutes at most. And in other cases, they could be within a minute or so also. So we definitely recommend. One thing that we have noticed is so especially for NBA, we've noticed this is we post our projections early in the morning at Awesemo, and our best bets in the morning really outperform by a large amount. And what we end up seeing a lot of times is the sports book end up moving their lines towards ours since we have so many numbers available, as well as to be honest, a lot of DFS sites just kind of are moving with some of our updates as well. So I think getting your bets in early in the day is very helpful, and Odd Shopper allows you to do that. And then, of course, as news moves throughout the day, you should be able to adjust for that, and we can give you you could see like which ones are the best bet at 5 o'clock as well.
It's funny. I often on shows I'm watching it, and Greg will like in real time be like, "Oh, this player's out. That changes the line. You got to go make your bet right away." And I'm like, I get a little bit of FOMO since I can't do it here. I'm jealous of those of you who can take advantage of this stuff. People posting their betting cards on Twitter, big bets that they won. And I'm like, man, I want to be able to do that. But hopefully that is coming sooner than later. So I kind of touched on this a little bit, but do you have concerns about DFS because sports betting is taking over? Do you have concerns about DFS not being a viable income source long term, just because sports betting might be cutting into the market, and obviously there are other relevant factors that the rate could increase, that kind of thing. Are you concerned about DFS not being a viable income source long term?
Yeah, so I guess it depends on a lot of factors. I do think that it's very possible that like DFS contests could shrink over time, but we haven't really seen that too much. I would say it's kind of plateaued more than anything right now. I don't think it's. Yeah, I feel pretty confident it's not really getting bigger right now, but it could. I haven't really seen it started to decline yet. So if it does start to decline, then that could be definitely a negative sign. And as you know, sports bets go more and more mainstream, I think that is a possibility. The thing that DFS has that sports betting doesn't have is you have the chance to win $100,000 every night, or $1 million, whatever, 100 times a year. And that's something that is going to be super hard to get in sports betting. Sure, you could play like 13 leg parlay or something like that in order to get that, but for the most part you don't have that opportunity to have the big lottery style payout, and I think a lot of people like that. So I think that there's a good place for both of them to coexist, and hopefully that will continue to be the case. I would say I don't have major fears of it ending anytime immediately, but I mean, it's certainly possible.
It's overall, I would say that was a reassuring statement, especially from somebody who has been in DFS from the beginning. So you've kind of seen like the landscape. You've seen the changing of the landscape over time. So it's reassuring to me that you don't think we're going to be losing DFS as a viable income source long term. I want to talk a little bit about your process. Now we've kind of talked about it anyway. I'm pretty sure since you're creating projections and ownership projections for Awesemo that you're using those and that you are using Fantasy Cruncher. So I'm going to leave out those questions. But do you do simulations on the side outside of like the simulations that you do for the Awesemo tools, the top stacks tool, for example? You know, a lot of that is sim based. Do you run your own simulations outside of that kind of stuff?
So not really. Mostly I will for maybe like to research something, like to see why, for instance, the Cubs are coming up as 10% the top stack when I don't necessarily think that they could have a really big game. So I might simulate those type of things, but not like I know from like some of your conversations is like to build out lineups and stuff like that. I don't really do that. I tried to kind of play around with it a little bit and do those type of things, especially when there were no sports going on during COVID. So I talked a lot with Brian Hooper. I know he talked a lot about it a lot on his show. And the thing that I just found was there were just like so many minute things that really changed the outcome of your simulation. Like if you had for whatever reason, if the lineups that you created for your simulation didn't have any lineups with player A and player B together except for one, that lineup, might grade out really well when in reality it's just kind of an average lineup in general, because there are going to be some lineups with those two players together. And so there's just like a lot of random things that really sway your the lineups that you could make from a simulation to not be very accurate of what is actually going to happen in the contest, and in sense then because of how top heavy they are, like it skews your results so much. And it doesn't feel like it can give you the most robust answer to stuff, whereas compared to if you're just like running Fantasy Cruncher and making your lineups from that type of process, or looking at the top stacks or something, it feels like you can control those better. Maybe if you did like on the interview that Nerdy Tenor talked about, where he kind of pitted all the lineups against each other to kind of come up with lineups that people were going to use, and you could really come up with a smart way to figure that out, then maybe. But I kind of feel like even I don't know his process, but just from the way he was talking about it, I feel like even that is just going to have so many lineups that people are just not going to use, built in ways that they aren't going to use, and there's just too many flaws, in my opinion.
Yep. Speaking of, you brought up Nerdy Tenor, you brought up Brian Hooper, and it has come to my attention that some asshole out there has been asking people on a show whether they play game theory optimal versus exploitative style of DFS. Of course, I'm joking. That I am that asshole without totally understanding what GTO means, or at least not explaining it well. So I'm going to leave out the GTO aspect of this question and just ask you, what kind of style do you think you play of DFS? Would you call yourself an exploitative DFS style player, or some other kind of style?
I would say much more closer to exploitive player than GTO player. And I think because we have ownership projections that are so good at Awesemo, that if you aren't taking advantage of mistakes that people are making, and they make them in very systematic ways, that you are not fully taking advantage of the right strategy. Like you don't need to play a perfect set of lineups to have the best ROI. I think it's a lot easier to take advantage of the mistakes that other people are making. So I'd look at things like leverage and top stacks and go more that route than directly on, okay, the Cubs are 10% optimal, I'm going to go 10% on the Cubs. I will instead say, hey, the Cubs are 10% optimal, but the field is going to own them 7% of the time. So I want to go something over 10% on
Yep.
them. And that seems like to me, I mean, I get it that if you didn't know what they were going to do, that 10% would be the correct answer. And that makes a lot of sense. But I feel like we know with pretty high confidence what people are going to do. So we might as well take advantage of that information.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And I think part of the reason that I got pushed back for asking people whether they play GTO is that most of us don't have the means of playing GTO. Just giving it some more thought. It sounds like Nerdy Tenor is one of the few who actually probably has the means of playing GTO because he runs all of these simulations, and a lot of us probably don't actually have that ability. Also, as somebody, so I'm not involved in the Awesemo tools at all. I'm not even an Awesemo employee, but I get the impression that the tools kind of set you up to play an exploitative style. I mean, they're telling you exactly like the ownership projections of players, and they're telling you their odds of being in the optimal lineup, which kind of to me sets you up to play exploitatively. Would you agree with that to some extent, at least the tools kind of tell you what you should do if you want to play an exploitative style?
Yeah, and one thing that we're going to be working on releasing here for each of the sports is kind of like a strategy guide for new users on how they should look at the different tools and how they should interpret them and make a quick strategy so that we can eliminate like mistakes that people are making right away. And I think that exploitative approach is definitely one of those processes. I mean, technically, you could kind of play a GTO strategy with our tools in a lot of senses. Like
Mhm.
you could play 10% of the Cubs, right? You could just go by that type of approach and not consider our ownership projections at all. And so it's possible. I think there's a couple things that you maybe would need in addition to some of the tools, like maybe it says you should play uh, Walker Bueller. He's going to be optimal 30% of the time, but you should really play him a little bit more because you don't need the very optimal lineup, right? So there's like some small things that you could probably do to get to a little bit better GTO, but
Mhm.
I think you could probably play kind of close to GTO in a lot of the sports, especially like MMA or something like that. I think you could probably do that. But our general goal is, yeah, you should. I would call the general Awesemo strategy is more exploitative.
Okay, that's good because that's definitely my takeaway from the tools is that this is kind of telling me how to play exploitatively, which is I think that's just kind of my general lean anyway, was how can I take advantage of the field's mistakes, and then the tools kind of showed me put numbers on how to do that. So definitely helpful for me in trying to play exploitatively. Um,
It's worked out well for you.
it has gone well for me overall for sure. All right, so let's talk about like just general like game day process. What your typical process looks like, and I guess it's a little bit different for you because you are doing stuff behind the scenes as well. But when does your work start on an NBA slate in terms of actually building out your lineups? I don't know if it's possible for you to decouple your process of building lineups versus your work for the site, but if it is, what does it look like for you when you're starting to actually build your lineups on a day that you're obviously not on a show or anything going up to lock?
Yeah. So the main thing that I'm probably starting, let's see, 5. I'm trying to think of Eastern time, but that's what everyone thinks of. Maybe 5 or 5:30 Eastern time, something like that. Um, and mainly just to kind of get a sense of which type of players are kind of coming up a lot, and also kind of thinking about which players might more than likely, like if they come into play, how valuable they're going to be, I guess. So that's kind of like the main thing that I do. And luckily, like with our tool, I can just like plug in what our scenario is going to be, and I can kind of get an understanding of what it will look like if Jimmy Butler is out, or what it'll look like if you know whatever this other player is starting that we think is a possibility that they might be starting. So that's kind of what I'm doing at about that time frame. And then I do like to listen to kind of our shows in the background. So of course, when you're on there, or Adam, or I really enjoy like the live before lock. That in particular is a lot of fun. Just especially when Eric and Greg make a fun combo of going
They're a
back
fun
and
duo.
forth
Yeah.
of going back and forth at each other, and giving out great information at the same time. So so that's a lot of fun. So I normally will watch that, or at least have it on in the background, and I'll try to catch deeper dive quite a bit also, because Adam's like definitely like one of the best in the business. So it's good to be able to hear what he might be saying, and if he has some different takes on what the rotations will look like or something like that. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of my general process, and then hopefully I get everything uploaded before before lock comes around. So definitely building stuff up until lock, and then I'm a pretty heavy late swapper, I would say, also. So
Yeah.
my late swap process is just to hang around and be ready for any news that comes out, because we have spent so much time thinking about what is going to happen in those scenarios. I think that's a big advantage that you get as Awesemo subscriber. We get that news out there really quickly, and those minutes updated, and hopefully get a nice edge for folks.
Definitely useful for me to have that stuff pretty quickly. Do you ever make assumptions different than the Awesemo projections? So for example, when a player is questionable, I can't remember what Alex said for NBA at this point. I think you assume that they're in unless they're doubtful or out. You have to assume that a player is going to be in, because yeah, I think that's what he said, that you have to assume that a player is going to be in when doing the projections, because then those are going to give you more late swap opportunities. Essentially, if you assume that the starter is going to be in, it's easier to swap down than to swap up. Do you ever go into a slate though making the opposite assumption with your own lineups, because you have access to the ability, you have access to, here's what it would look like, here's what the projections would be if this player is ruled out? Do you ever make those kinds of assumptions for your own set of lineups?
I do occasionally, especially if there's a couple of games that the very late locks that I want to make sure I have spaces locked up. Like I don't want to fill all those spaces up with 7 o'clock game type
Yep.
players. Um, so I will in those cases. And I would say that that's probably not the most likely thing that'll happen.
Mhm.
But if I just see so much value that is going to open, like, Alex Len, or is going to start, or somebody Whiteside, a lot of those really cheap centers, for instance, those are the ones that really stand out.
Yeah.
If it looks like there's a chance that those guys might start, or I might like to build those lineups to have them ready. But I would say that that's less often the case that I do
Okay.
that.
You're usually just using them
Most of
as
the
they are.
time, I will just late swap more
Yeah.
so than anything.
Yeah.
Unless I just see that I'm getting, like I said, if I'm getting all kinds of guys from the 7 o'clock game, and I just don't want that to happen, that would
Yeah.
be the
Try to
case.
build in some better projections for the later guys. Yeah, I do the same thing too. It's probably just not as sophisticated as you, because I don't have any kind of actual like precise projections for what would happen if in that scenario, if Rudy Gobert is ruled out. I'll just give a big boost to his backup Hassan Whiteside, and make a set of lineups where I'm assuming Gobert is out, and then I'm going to want some Whiteside. But yeah, it's definitely not something that is a very sophisticated process for me when I do go away from the assumptions in the tools. What sport would you say you have the biggest edge in, and where does that edge come from?
So that's a good question. I don't know that I I don't know that I think that there's a huge difference between NBA, MLB, and NFL. I think if I look at my ROIs, most of those are pretty similar in general. Especially if I take out like Millie Maker win, for instance, in NFL, then they're probably pretty similar. Maybe NBA is slightly ahead. I think the biggest edge though is probably overall as an MMA, I would guess, because I think that one is still in the early stages, or maybe NFL Showdown also.
Hmm.
Um, Both of those are kind of like, it's not as easy as it was like back in 2015 and 2016 for NBA and those before people got better at them, but it's close to that kind of type thing. People haven't figured out all of the strategies yet for them. So I would say probably those. Maybe NFL Showdown is getting a little bit tougher as we go along. So maybe NFL Showdown 2 years ago was more that spot, but MMA probably is the easiest one right now, I would say, especially like when that was the only thing in town and they were running really big contests. People were playing that terribly, and I think they've gotten a little bit better now, but I think that's probably still my highest ROI, I would say.
Really? Okay. I know that I saw just when I started playing MMA, you took down like one of the first contests that I was in, I think. But I have not had a lot of success in MMA. I've been still working on it, but I think would you agree with me that MMA is a sport where you kind of need to put in more time than a lot of other sports because a lot of it is getting unique and you can't do that via like correlation. And a lot of times if you leave too much salary on the table, you're ending up making lineups that are not going to have a good chance at actually winning. Would you say that you need to put in more time for MMA, or is that just, or do you think I'm wrong about that?
That's interesting. I put in like the least amount of time for
Really?
MMA,
Okay.
I think. So it might be. It probably could help me out some more if I was putting in more time in it. Basically, what I can do is like look at our top fighters tool and get majority of the information that I need from that tool. I use our projections and our ownership as well too, but that one gives me a good idea of how often that player can make it into the top six or how often that player can get score over 100. And I guess maybe I play a little bit more game theory optimal, I guess, in MMA because I'm trying to, well, still probably not game theory optimal exactly, but um, I use those data points, which are kind of along those lines, and then help me be able to understand how much I want of those type of players, and kind of figure that a lot of times the field is maybe a little bit over reliant on projections. So yeah, I think those tools really help out a ton, and I think you can really do pretty well on MMA. Now, to your point, I should probably spend a little bit more more time on doing it outside of just the tools, though. It feels like to me NBA is the one that takes the most time because, well, for me, I guess because I'm always thinking about what the rotations look like.
Yeah.
If you're just going to use our projections, which already saves you all that time, I think you could just kind of plug in the projections and run them in FC and make some really good lineups right from the get go. So I guess for me, I'm on a research side, NBA takes the longest, but from like a user, probably NBA is the easiest, I guess, and the shortest. So I don't know. I
Yeah.
guess it all depends on what side of the things you're on.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually spend a good amount of time on NBA and I don't spend nearly enough time on MMA. I just know in talking with Jordan Cooper regularly and then in talking with Brian Jester, I know that both of them sound like they spend a ton of time on MMA kind of perfecting their lineup. So I get the impression that those guys spend a lot of time on it, but you've had a lot of success. It sounds like spending less time on it. So maybe it's not as necessary. The top fighters tool is definitely a big part of my process lately. And I think that I've been making lineups that at least seem to me to be more plus EV when I do try to build in. I like cap my players loosely based on their odds of being scoring 100 points or more, and then looking at the ownership, and it's kind of a process for me. But I generally spend like 40 minutes on MMA, and I feel like I could benefit from spending a little bit more time than that on it
Yeah.
at least. But
Yeah. Yeah, that's probably me as well. I probably should spend some more time on it, but I'm probably spending similar to like what you're saying.
okay. All right. I want to talk a little bit about live finals just because in looking through your results, I noticed that you've been to several different live finals, both FanDuel and DraftKings, and across several different sports. You've been to a ton of different live finals. As you alluded to, you've met Alex there, and I've been to several with him. But and of course, you won the FanDuel NFL Championship in 2018. So I want to get into like what attracts you to qualifier events. But I really want to start with the fact that you went to a live final at the Playboy Mansion in 2015, which was like the heyday of DFS, where it was just wild. I'm reading Dueling with Kings right now, and I can tell it was like, man, it was a different atmosphere back in 2015. So I just want to start there. What was that experience like? And were there any other DFS names that I might recognize there?
Yeah, so it's probably a different atmosphere now because all of us that were playing in 2015 are 7 years older now.
Yep. True.
So that's the problem. But there are a lot of new young guns that are pretty impressive that are coming out right now. So that final, I'm trying to remember who all was there. I can't. It feels like so many of the players that I hung out with at that event aren't playing anymore, actually.
Okay.
But there's a lot of really good ones. Like a good friend of mine, JL003, Jesse was there. I still talk to him quite a bit. A buddy of mine, Chris, was there. He's a close friend of mine, and actually won second in that event. So that was super cool to be able to hang out and get that experience. And then, of course, all of like the original
Andia.
great players, were there. I don't know if Kandi was there or not. I'm not sure. I don't
Okay.
feel like he played those type of qualifiers, but he may have been, and I just don't recall. But yeah, just a lot of people, and that was a fun time. I don't know if there's any one in particular event that stood out as being so much more fun, but they're really all fun. I probably first started going to them because that was just a way to get more money in play.
Okay.
So I would just go and play those contests, and they offered a pretty good return. Like I said, my buddy got second at that one. They were running a whole bunch of small ones back in 2015 for MLB, which was pretty cool. There was like a 10-person contests where the finals was just like 10 people, and whoever won those 10 tickets, and there were, I don't know, ticket values were whatever, 20,000 or something like that. They weren't as huge because there's only 10 people, but you could go to a bunch of different places. And I went to several of those that year, won one of those, and that was, kind of fun, just kind of going around and hanging out with a couple of people. It was pretty fun because you would get to those with 10 people, and it would be like 2 or 3 good players and then like 7 people that kind of just randomly won the tickets, and you could just win those kind of easily, almost like with a cash lineup, of course. And so that was kind of interesting. And then had pretty good luck overall. So I think that just kind of kept me playing. And as I went to each of them, it was just fun hanging out with different people. You get to go to different locations. So we got, trips out to LA and Vegas and Denver and Boston and Chicago and all over the place, and got to go to a lot of different places, meet a lot of different people. And they're always just a lot of fun. They take care of you really well at the events, whether it's, having the best drinks available, or going out to some of the best restaurants, or just hanging out with people. I think it's just a lot of fun. So I wouldn't say I go after them hard if I don't get a ticket and it's not going to be the end of the world, because I've been to quite a few of them. So I won't max out on any of them just because I know it's high risk, I guess. But I think it's a lot of fun to do.
So do you sometimes you get one ticket and you say that's enough because you've already won the vacation, the experience of going to the live final, you don't need to keep going and max out the contest?
Yeah, for sure. I might still play them less. I think my general thing is like, maybe I'll enter like 1% into the qualifiers, and I won't enter them all either. Like if they run some that are super high dollar ones, and the only people that are in it are Sean and Alex and Whistles Go Woo and McLovin and those guys, then maybe I'm not going to join that one. But if it's one of the larger ones, with like $10 entries or $40 entries or stuff like that, I'll normally do like 1% instead of like the 3% that you could max it. And then that, if I already have a ticket, maybe I'll skip even more of them, and instead of doing 1%, maybe I'll do a 0.5% or something like that. So that's kind of how I think of it. You only really need one to make the trip, and then 2 to come up with the best lineup. So you're just making worse and worse lineups every time you make more of them. So it's kind of a diminishing return, I guess, essentially.
That makes sense. And you kind of you answer the question, what attracted you to live finals? Sounds like it's the money involved. It is typically, at least these days, there is a lot more money involved. Live finals have the biggest payouts generally, and then also the experience is pretty great. Anything else that attracts you to live finals, or is that kind of your answer there?
Yeah, I think that's the main thing. Meeting the people, like wouldn't have been able to meet like Alex and all these other guys that I've talked to throughout the experience. So yeah, I think that's been super cool.
Let me take a minute away from this conversation with Steve Buzzard to remind you to give us a like and subscribe so you can keep up with all of our shows, DFS offers, giveaways, and much more. Once you subscribe, hit that notification button to get alerts when our shows go live. Be sure to also check out our monthly podcast giveaway. Just subscribe to our podcast channel and leave a 5-star review with your Awesemo username or Twitter handle to be entered to win a free month of Awesemo Plus Platinum. All right, well, let's get to a few listener questions before we close it out. Got one from Will Sue, who won a Millie Maker this past year in NFL. He said, Steve talked about his COVID recovery with Brian Jester on the Emotional Bankroll podcast back in February. I just re-listened to that podcast. It sounded like you had it pretty bad, like you were really struggling with COVID, maybe had long COVID. So he said he was wondering if things have normalized recently or if it has changed your playing style at all.
So I didn't know that Will was a Millie Maker winner. Congrats, Will, for that. It's hard to keep track with everyone who's won those now, but yeah. So I would say it's not 100% better, and yeah, it definitely is the long COVID. It's been starting to get better though. For the first probably year, it was just really exhausting and took a lot out of me to even do basic tasks, I would say, and having like the excitement to do things and just being tired all the time. So that really was pretty exhausting. It feels like it's getting a little bit better every day. I have definitely in the last couple of months of just seeing like feeling more like what I'm used to feeling like. So that's kind of helped. I would say it has probably impacted my DFS play because I didn't feel as motivated to research things as much. So it probably put me a little bit behind where I maybe was going on my trajectory and those type of things. But hopefully, we continue to work on a lot of the things that I was mentioning in the emotional bankroll, and hopefully, mental aspects of DFS is probably one of the biggest things that people don't talk about. So hopefully I'll continue to get better at that. And, luckily I'd say my results have still been good. So that's been a plus. Although this last NFL season was not that great, but
you just won
win
MLB this past Sunday or whatever. A few days ago, you won MLB, and it seems like you're near the top every day in MLB. Like you're one of the few names that I see up there pretty consistently. So it seems like at least your DFS play has kind of seems to be coming around. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I mean, it's luckily a lot of it is process that I have existing and stuff like that. So that helps out a lot. Now, if only I could win some of the 100Ks like Sean wins every day, that would be that would be helpful.
A big help. Well, we got one today. we got an MLB 100K today, so that's hopefully one of us can go take it down. Hopefully me, if I'm being honest. But if it's not me, I hope it's you. All right.
All right, fair enough.
Rinpack asks, what was Nicole's reaction when you won? I assume Nicole is your wife. When you won 2 commas, and he says, "Yeah, shut out Mrs. Buzzard."
So. I appreciate Eric's response to that as well. But so I would say it was pretty calm in general. I think my favorite response was it was late in the fourth quarter of the last games, and she got back home, and I was like, "Hey, look what we're winning," and she's like, "I never want to know what we're winning until everything is over," but I had been home and playing video games with the kids, and actually just been leading for pretty much all of the afternoon slate. So I was kind of getting a little bit antsy to tell somebody. So that was kind of her main response, and then certainly she was a bit pretty excited after finally getting that win to come out. So in general, I think we've won a lot. So it obviously that was still a big a change to our finances, but maybe not as big of a reaction as maybe what it would have been a few years earlier.
Yeah.
And that's still like we we were talking about that. I saw Ryan's question. I brought that up to Nicole, and it was like we were talking about even at the live final that year when we won the NFL one. It was kind of like FanDuel probably didn't get quite the emotional reaction that they get out of most people, which I feel kind of bad about a little bit because that's their marketing thing. But at the same time, I was like within a couple, like, so the way that went down was there was a final drive where basically Tom Brady needed, if he would have scored anything, like it was first and goal, I think, and that was like the last major game that was left for the live final anyways. And if I needed him to not to score anything, this was another one where I was leading for quite some time and just kind of trying to hold people off, and he didn't score anything. So like that was pretty much locked up the live final, which was great. And they kind of, they're recording it and stuff. But at the same time, there was this game, the Seattle game was going on, and it was going to overtime. It didn't mean anything for the live final, but I had two lineups that were still live to win the Fan Millionaire, whatever they call it, that they run. That one, it was all the people that aren't, at the live final, and you could just buy in for whatever you could buy in. And so I was very, focused on that one still. So FanDuel, if I get in there and I'm going to win another one, FanDuel gods or DraftKings gods or DFS gods or whoever it is, I will have a better reaction for you next time for that one. Let me win another one here and I can make up for that one. But that one did not work out, and that would have been a nice one to have won both of those on the same day. But
that one was for a milli?
Yeah, no such luck. But that was keeping me kind of distracted a little bit.
Yeah, and you got that big check. That is actually your profile picture is winning that the FanDuel championship, right?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
That was out in New York.
I've never got to hold one of those big checks. Is it heavy? How's it feel?
A little bit.
Is it?
Yeah. I mean, it's not like super heavy, but like if you're
awkward.
Just yeah, it's awkward.
Right.
It's interesting to carry around in the airport, needless to say.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And the belt as well.
Oh yeah, that's got to be tough. That's got to be really tough. So, better just not win, I would think. All right, you mentioned Eric Lindquist's response. He said that your wife is better than 729 Millimaker W's, absolute legend of a lady. How has everybody met your wife? I have not had the pleasure of meeting your wife. Do you take her to live finals with you, or have you gone on trips out to San Diego or something?
Yeah, at live finals. I would say she makes it out to, I don't know, maybe half or so, something like that. Maybe not quite even that many, but she's made it out to a few. So they've seen her out in Miami and Denver and a couple of those locations, as well as the kids. And the kids love talking to Eric because he's like a big kid. So
and he's Big Bird. I mean, come on.
Yeah, he plays a lot of video games like me and the kids. And like I said, that's what I was doing the whole time. That game was coming down the wire for the Millie Maker, just playing games with the kids. And that was kind of like I had said, hey, we're gonna play games once we're done building lineups, and that's the way it is. So yeah, we like playing video games a lot.
Nice, fun stuff. All right, I'll go on to another listener question from Ruddy Brilliant, who asks, do the whistles go woo more than the buzzer goes buzz? Trying to set up a boxing match here.
Oh, I don't know about a boxing match. So I feel pretty confident I've won more than whistles go woo lifetime, but I've been playing a lot longer than him too. So he's gaining on me really quickly. So I don't know. Right now, the whistles go woo probably more often than the buzzer goes buzz, but maybe not lifetime though.
Yeah. And I think you're winning still enough these days that at least a conversation. Not many people are in the conversation with whistles go woo for the past couple of years. So yeah, lifetime, I'd say you probably have the edge, but it's good to just be in the conversation still. All right, Rafael Michael Soto asks, how do you overcome your biases when creating lineups? And he wants to know about your bankroll management. We've kind of touched on bankroll management already, that it's not a concern just because you win so much, essentially. But how do you overcome your biases? And I don't know if this is based on your screen name being Dacoltz or if there are other biases that maybe come into play. But do you have a good answer for that question? How do you
Yep.
overcome your biases?
So let me hit on bankroll management
Okay.
first for a quick second. So I think bankroll management is still pretty important, especially just on the mental side of things. And while I'm not good at it, there are quite a few things that I do to keep my bankroll in check. Like I don't max enter the high stakes contest. My ROI says I should be just max entering those, but I don't want to take on like the ups and downs that go with it. I've heard many people talk about their downswings, and I'd rather just kind of have that steady upward swing and maybe like some smaller downward swings. So I do kind of avoid that a little bit. And like I said, also on the live finals, like I'm only entering in a fraction. I'm not like max entering those. My goal is like never been to be at the top of the Roto Grinders rankings. And actually, if you look at my Roto Grinders history, you'll see like I have records in there from like 2015, and then I don't have anything in there until I started with Awesemo. It's because I just took my name off there completely because I didn't even want to compare myself to others. So I didn't feel like I had to push myself to be higher. And that was kind of my way to get around bankroll management a little bit. But with going at Awesemo, I was like, okay, probably should make sense to at least kind of show where I'm standing there. And since I am kind of touting things, so I thought that was kind of a helpful thing. And then overcoming my biases, I think the biggest thing there is I don't I try not to even really have any because I'm kind of just going mostly by my process. I make my process as consistent as possible every single day. I actually did a pro video of that on how you should make your process consistent every day. And then I don't let anything sway me because basically that's what that's basically what it is, and that's what my process told me should be the answer. So I'm going to stick with that process. I'm not going to pick somebody from the Colts just because I want them to win this game or I don't really like this other player. So keep your process as consistent as possible. Then also, I don't watch as many games as I used to. Like I said at the beginning, I used to watch a ton of games. One, I don't watch them because I don't have time and I rather spend the time with my family doing things that they want to do. But two, I think it does bias you quickly. One thing I remember when I was starting up, there was this game, and I'm trying to remember who it was, and I can't off the top of my head right now, but there was a NBA player that I felt like I had a really good shot to win the tournament, and he just was. I turned on the game and was watching it, and this player was just like standing over the corner doing nothing, and just got really frustrating. And then I saw myself not wanting to put him in my lineups. And back then I was only building 3 lineups. So when you're hand building, it's a lot easier to, it's a lot harder to not have biases get in to your play. And I just consistently not putting him in there. And then I saw him do well and winning tournaments, and it's just like, well, that's a dumb bias to have in mind just because I watched him not win a contest for me. So yeah, so I don't watch as many games.
You talked about that on the podcast with Jester, and I thought it was one of the more interesting points that the point you made is that if you can watch every game, it is beneficial to watch sports. Like you can gain some knowledge if you watch like every play, every game. But if you're not watching every play, every game, you're just watching here and there, that is where you develop biases because you're not seeing the whole portfolio. You're maybe seeing, and you gave the example, I think, and I don't remember who the player is now either. I was trying to think of it, but you gave the example of a player who you were watching and they just kind of sat in the corner and didn't really do anything. For me, that example is actually several years ago, Klay Thompson. I remember the first time I ever watched Klay Thompson play, he was just standing in the corner and not doing anything. I was like, why am I playing this guy in DFS all the time? Like, he sucks. He doesn't do anything. So I think that was a really good point, that it's like, if you can watch every game all the time, then maybe you could actually gain some knowledge, and it's beneficial to watch players and watch sports. But if you're not watching enough, if you're just watching snippets here and there, that is where you kind of develop biases, was a point that you made that I found really, really interesting there.
Yep, exactly. If you have 80 hours to watch all those games, then maybe.
Yep. Which I guess the rest of us do, because we don't spend it on the tools like you do. So maybe I have no excuses. I need to be watching all these games. All right. Our final question comes from producer Mike Lawrence, aka Awesemo, who asks, who is your favorite space Buzz? Is it Buzz Aldrin or is it Buzz Lightyear?
Oh, I've got to go with Buzz Lightyear there, no doubt. Looking forward to the new Buzz Lightyear movie, right? That's coming out, is it this summer, I think? But we've with the family, we've watched many Toy Stories, so I think that's one of my favorite series. So
all right,
that's a no-brainer, Buzz Lightyear.
All right, easy
answer.
question there. Good. Yeah, as somebody who doesn't have kids, I don't really know. I think I have seen Toy Story, the original. I think I've seen it, but I don't remember it at this point. I'm glad that you have a stronger opinion on that question. Okay.
Well, you should check out the other ones. They're good even without kids.
All right, good to know. All right, so the question that I've been closing it out with every week is, and maybe you've already talked about this a little bit. It's kind of the issue with bringing up this question last is that oftentimes it seems like we have already talked about this to some extent. But tell me about your favorite DFS win or DFS win celebration.
So I think I was trying to debate this one because I know you have been asking it. I think my favorite is actually way back in 2015 NBA. There was a slam contest that was like 50K to first, and that one, I think, maybe not necessarily just for that, but just like that whole time frame where I was winning several contests like that, and it was just a feel of like how consistently those are winning, and this is the time I'm building up a bankroll, and that 50,000 I think had so much more impact on everything else that, you know, maybe if I didn't win that contest or a couple of the other contests in that time frame, maybe I wouldn't have dedicated as much time to it going forward. Maybe it wouldn't have resulted in the Million Maker win, the live final, all the other 100K wins. Maybe it wouldn't have stopped, you know, wouldn't have moved out to Colorado or met the Awesemo team and stuff. So it just feels like those wins back there, and that there's one in particular was a slam win that, you know, was, you know, leading that night, and I could just remember winning that $50,000 contest. I think that was the first 50,000 that I had won, and I think that would be probably it wasn't a great celebration because it was pretty late at night and everyone else was already in bed. Yep. So
is that usually the case for you too, where it's like by the time you win, the house is asleep, you're just by yourself? It seems to be more often than not for me.
I would say so. So that's one nice thing, I guess, about being in Colorado. I make it to the end of the slate more often. A lot of times out on the East Coast, when you have to get up the next morning early, I'm like checking just to see what I won the next morning. So at least now I get to sweat out till the end of the games more often. But at that point I was on East Coast and I was staying up for that one. So I was new to it at that point. Yeah, but yes, you're right. More often than not, the family is in bed, and in general, I don't really talk about it with the family too much. So I give Nicole the updates when it's a super big win or when taxes come around. So that's nice. That's the main updates, and to her credit, she doesn't really want to know much else from that. So
nice. Yeah, I'm as a night owl, I'm usually up until the end of slates. It's pretty rare for me to fall asleep before a slate is over, but I'm kind of jealous of the people who can, you know, go to bed and wake up with 6 figures in their bank account or some big win in their bank account. Seems like a lot of fun, but I have never had that experience because I'm always up till the end of the slate anyway. All right, Steve. So at Steve Buzzard on Twitter, where else can people find you?
In Discord, Thursdays, ask me anything, swing by. Doesn't even have to be DFS. News Guide likes to ask me all kinds of other non-DFS questions, but most of them are DFS questions. So come by there, or feel free to. I'm really bad, I've noticed, at getting on Discord for DMs, but I will eventually get back to you on that. They just don't pop up. I don't have a good way
I'm
of
the same way.
tracking those very well.
Yep.
So I will get back to you, but if I didn't get back to you originally, that's probably why. And you could DM me on Twitter as well. So that was always a good approach.
All right, right on. Well, thanks again, Steve. It was a lot of fun having you on for episode 16 of High Stakes. Thanks again to Mike Lawrence for producing, and thank you for watching. You'll be able to find episode 17 of High Stakes next Friday on the Awesemo YouTube channel or wherever podcasts live. Have a great weekend.